Hello everybody, welcome to ChinFat. This episode I'm going to be going through how to create proxies. There's two different ways you can be creating proxies, one with Premiere Pro and Adobe's Media Encoder. One is the proprietary method, which we have in another episode, and in this episode I'm showing the old school way. And there's a benefit to the old school way versus the proprietary Premiere Pro method of creating proxies. And there would be benefits to doing either method. It just depends on what you really want to deal with. If you use a Premiere Pro proprietary method, the benefit is you have a quick little flip switch right over here, which I show in the other episode. That's little toggle proxies that it will quickly, immediately toggle between the high quality and the low quality. But the downfall of this is that if you want to move from one computer to another and you have a hard drive that you're moving, taking with your footage and moving to another computer, you have to take all the footage with you. You have to take the high quality and the low quality with you. So if you have a movie that you've shot that's like an 8K and there's just these huge files and you have a terabyte and a half, you have to take the whole terabyte and a half to be able to have this ability to toggle back and forth. The benefit of the old school method, which I'm going to be showing here in a minute, is you don't have to do that. You can just you can proxy all the footage. You can have a smaller folder. Say you have like a terabyte and a half of footage, and then when you proxy it, maybe only have like 50 gigabytes of proxy footage, and you only have to take that 50 gigabytes on your hard drive, and you can edit with it. But then later on, you don't have the ability to switch your proxies back and forth on the fly like this. You have to unlink your proxy footage and then relink the high quality, which is a little bit more of a process. But so, like I said, each one kind of has its own benefit, just depending on what you need to do. So with that being said, I'm going to import. I've got a couple different types of footage I'm going to be using here. I'm going to proxy some red footage, and I'm going to proxy some drone footage that was shot on a DJI, which is an H.264 codec. And the reason why you might want to do proxy is because if you do shoot in something like 8K and you want that high quality, if your computer system's too slow to run that 8K footage, then you're basically making a smaller version of those, a less bulky version that has less color information and less resolution. So do the edit, and then once you're done with the edit, you can relink it to the high quality footage. So I'm going to go into the media browser here, and if you hit tilde over this window, it'll go full screen here. Go to my hard drive. I'm going to go to the date that it was shot. Go down to my footage folder. By the way, I'm hitting arrow down here to go to different folders, and then arrow right will expand those folders and arrow left will collapse them. So I'm going to go down, arrow right, go down to my red footage, and there's all my red footage there that I'm going to proxy. So I'm just going to select all this, hit Command A or Control A on a PC, right click on the footage. This is one of the best ways to import red footage, by the way, and hit import. If you try to drag and drop it in, it will like duplicate it, and it does this really weird stuff with red footage. So the media browser is the way to go, or the import tab here also works with red footage. So here's all my footage that I want to proxy. If I select one of these clips, you can see this is 8K footage, so it's very high resolution, and it's also raw footage that was shot on the red camera. So these files are very, very bulky. In fact, this clip that runs about 1 minute long is about 8 gigabytes, so that's quite a large file. And I'm on a system right now that if I was playing this back, it would lag and kind of be choppy. So if I double click on this and I play through it, it's chugging and lagging because has so much data that it's having trouble processing it on this specific computer here. So now, one thing that you have to know when it comes to old school proxy creation is you want to match certain properties. I do not have to match the resolution, obviously. I'm going to be taking down the resolution, but you do have to match the frames per second. You also have to match the time code, because notice on here this has arbitrary time code. The time code starts at 7 hours 53 minutes 34 seconds and 02 frames, and that's where it ends right there. So it has kind of this arbitrary time code that's generated by the red camera, but you have to make sure that you match time code. It's really difficult to screw that up unless you really don't know what you're doing and you're going digging into deep in some of the settings and trying to change some of the settings here. Another thing you want to consider is aspect ratio as well, matching your aspect ratio. Now, what the aspect ratio is how many pixels you have wide compared to how many pixels you have up and down. So this video clip here is wider than it is tall. And this was actually shot in what's called a 2:1 aspect ratio. The way you figure that out is you select your clip here and look at the resolution here. And by the way, if you're not seeing this, you have to do this little pull down right there, and you check mark preview area, and then any clip you select will show the basic attributes of that clip. So I'm going to open up my calculator, and the way you figure out that aspect ratio is you divide the higher number by the lower number. So we go 8192 divided by 4096. That equals 2. So that basically simplifies the smaller number down to 1, and then proportionally takes down the the higher number here as well. So that basically means you have 2 pixels going across for every 1 pixel up and down. So that is considered a 2-to-1 aspect ratio. That's kind of an odd one. We shot it in this so we had a little bit more space to the sides that we could use to pan back and forth if we wanted to. Because we're actually going to crop a portion out of this image to make it a 1.89 to 1 aspect ratio. And that's what we're going to make the proxies. You don't have to match the resolution exactly. You can change that resolution if that's the way it was intended for the final product, which this was. It was a wider aspect ratio, and normally when you're doing proxies, you're probably just going to be matching your aspect ratio, which still causes you to do a little bit of math. We will show you that when we do the drone footage. So what I'm going to do, and by the way, this right now is displaying in a red log right here, so it's a very flat LUT that it's displaying in. That is a really good LUT to color grade, just because it preserves dynamic range, it preserves details in the darks and in the highlights. But right now for the editor, we don't want to give the editor this flat looking footage. So I'm going to grab one of these clips, I'm going to drag it over into a timeline and create a timeline. And you can change this in the red raw settings if you want to. I like to kind of create a LUT inside of Premiere and then add that to everything else, make my own custom LUT. Yeah, if you double click on the clip, it loads up here into the monitor. You go to Effect Controls and you click on this little Source tab right here, and these are your red settings. And you can actually upload a LUT to it right here if you have one that you shot in. You could go down to this Creative LUT right here and browse and find the LUT that you want to load. But I'm going to create my own here. So I'm going to go on my timeline. We're going to go Arrangement under Color. Now I'm going to select this clip. And now that I'm in the color arrangement, let's say I want to make this so it doesn't look so flat here. This would be mostly just for the editor. I'm not doing a permanent color grading. The color grading can be done later. And right now this is in a log format. This is in the red log LUT, so it looks very flat. So I'm going to find a kind of a good representative picture of this here, like right there. And now I can grab the contrast. I can slide up the contrast, maybe give it a teeny bit of exposure. And since it's nighttime, I'm going to make it a little bluish. Turn that on and off. There's off, there's on. A little more contrast. There we go. And as mentioned before, if you do have LUTs, you can apply those LUTs here in the red footage by going to the source panel here. And down here you can do browse and load a LUT. And if you do that, you can basically copy this red source settings right here. You just select that, or you can right click on it and do copy, or you can select it and do Command C and copy as well. And then you can paste it to all the other red files down here. But instead I'm doing my own here. So I'm going to select this. I'm going to go away from the source and go back to the actual clip right here. This clip is what has, so this is a source that's original that's found in my project window, but the one that's in my timeline here is basically a copy of that source file, and it has its own lumetri color right here. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to do Command C and copy, and move over to this window here, my project window, and hit the tilde key. I'm going to select everything that's in here except for my timeline here. So I'm going to do Command A to select all, or Control A on a PC. It selected the timeline here, so I can hold down Command, or it would be Control on a PC, and click on that and it will deselect it. So all those are now selected, and now I can do Command V as in Victor and paste, and it will paste that LUT on all these clips right here. So now when I export these out and create proxies out of them, it will have that LUT applied on the source files here. This is going to look double dark now because this is reading the one that now has that copy of the lumetri on it in the source panel, and it also has that lumetri on it here, so it's basically doing it twice. So I don't even need this anyway, so I'm just going to select that and delete it, and now everything has that LUT applied to it in my project window. So now I'm going to send these all to Media Encoder. I'm going to hit Command M on a PC. That would be Control M, M as in Media. And I'll open this export window, and I'm going to tell this to send it to Media Encoder. I could do some quick presets over here if I wanted to, but I'll just do all that when I send it to Media Encoder. So let's send it to Media Encoder. So everything has now been sent over to Media Encoder. I'm going to go back to Premiere Pro and look at the aspect ratio here. We already looked at this earlier, and this is a 2-to-1 aspect ratio, so that we have twice as many pixels across as we do compared to what we have going up and down. So that is a 2-to-1 aspect ratio, but our final aspect ratio, I know for this, is going to be 1.89 to 1. So I'm going to take this down, and I'm going to crop the edges basically to fit it into a different aspect ratio, which is not quite as wide. It's 1.89 to 1. And a resolution that it's going to work pretty well, that's a 1.89 to 1, is going to be a 2048 by 1080. That's similar to 1920 by 1080, but a little bit wider, so it kind of meets the cinema aspect ratio of 1.89 to 1. And we do a calculator just to make sure. It will be the higher number divided by the lower number, and you get 1.89 to 1. You get 1.89 is the higher number and taking the lower number down to 1. So let's do our settings here and create our proxy files. I'm going to select all of them. I would select one and then I do Command A or Control A and it selects all. We're going to go over to the format here. We're going to change the format to QuickTime. Now I'm just going to move over here and I'm going to click on one of these right here. It's got this default, the DV-NTSC, which is an ancient format, so I'm not sure why it still uses that as the default. But we're going to click on that. Warns you that you're going to change multiple clips. That's fine. I say OK. And now we can start manipulating and changing the settings here. So preset, I'm going to do ProRes. ProRes 422 Proxy is an excellent proxy file to use. It's very smooth, which means every single frame has its own color data. It's a little bulkier file, but it runs as smooth as butter when you're editing, though. So I'm going to do ProRes Proxy. I'm going to go to the video tab here and we're going to change the resolution so it doesn't do 8K resolution. So it's going to be matching the source on a whole bunch of different settings, especially here is the most important right there, that it's got the same frame rate. But I'm going to uncheck the resolution. Resolution is not as important. So we're going to take this down, reducing the pixel size by quite a bit here. We're going to go down to, and by the way, I have unlocked this right here. If you have that locked, it'll change the aspect ratio proportionally. I don't want to do that. I want it to crop. So I'm going to deselect that. And most of the time you're not going to be doing this. This is just a special reason why we shot it at this aspect ratio. But I'm going to click on the top one and do 2048 and do the bottom one as 1080. There we go. And now we see that it is letterbox here because it's trying to fit the whole image in here. I don't want to have this letterbox, so I can go up to the source scaling here and tell it to scale to fill, and it will fill up until all those bars are gone. And it has cropped the edges a little bit as we intended. Now the audio is something that's very important with it creating proxies. You have to match the audio properties, not necessarily like the sample rate or the sample size, but at least the channel type though. If I go back to Premiere here and I select one of these, I look at the channel type, this has 2 mono. The default is usually a stereo channel. It's on most files, but when you get into red media and maybe sometimes things record on Atomos, you get into some weird file structure. Some Atomoses will record 4 mono channels. A lot of cameras like the Blackmagic will record a stereo file. A lot of DSLRs and mirrorless cameras will record a stereo channel. So those are the most common type, but with the red here, we need to match our by doing 2 mono. So here's my audio tab right there. And we're going to go down and we're going to change that to a mono file. And now I've got 2 mono channels, so I'm going to hit plus and we're going to add 1 more channel and I've got 2 mono. Now we are matching it. Now hit OK. And if you seem to remember, we did have a few of the files that were in, and this you got to pay attention on as well, that were shot at a higher frame rate, and they did not have, and it was shot on the red, and the red does not shoot audio when it's shooting a higher frame rate. So these ones have those 2 mono, these ones have that video and the audio mix. You can see the little waveform and the film strip. But these last 3 here, clip 37, 38, 39, do not have the audio attached. It's just video only. So we have to make a custom one for that. And that you have to be very, very conscious of when you're doing this, because sometimes if you mismatch the audio properties and even the frame rate, there's a chance that it will not connect later on after you've done all the editing. It will not reconnect the media. So you really have to kind of pay attention to what you're doing. And right here, 37, 38, 39. Got those 3 are the ones I have to change. I've got the same resolution that I've got on all these others, and as ProRes Proxy, I'm just going to change it and take the audio off. So we can just go up here and uncheck audio, and those ones are set, and hit OK. Last thing that we need to do before we export these files is we want to change the location. Right now it's wanting to send it to my downloads folder because it's the last place I dumped a file. So I'm going to hit Command A, select all, and I'm going to hit just one of these here, and it will change the location for all of them. Under here, I've already created my proxies, but I've got a folder that's going to be special for the proxies. And if you're doing proxies for something, a project that has several different camera cards, you shut over several days, and you have several different camera cards, I would recommend making the same card organization for your proxies as you do for your high quality media. This we only use 1 camera card on, so I can just make 1 folder, call it proxies, and choose. And that works just fine. Now you're just going to go up and press play right here, and it will start encoding your media. Like I said, I've already done it. So if I'm going to do this over again, let's go to, so I can just call these new proxies. Put it in that folder there, its own folder, hit choose, and you press play, and it will start encoding your proxies. With that being said, let's do a different type of encoding here. I've got my red footage encoding. I'm going to do a different type here. All right, so now I'm going to do the same thing to some media with a slightly different type of media here. I'm going to import some media. And these media files here are in UHD, 3840 by 2160, so almost 4K, and it's shot at 23.976, so it's more of a broadcast 24 frames per second frame rate that a lot of market cameras just shoot in. For all intents and purposes, this is 24 frames per second, but we are going to want to match that frame rate as well. Now, as I'm looking through this footage here, I'm seeing that I'm seeing two different frame rates that are being used here. One is the 23.976, which is, all intents and purposes, is 24 frames per second, more of a broadcast frame rate there. That's used for a lot of television shooting. And then also you have right here, 119.88, which is, for all intents and purposes, 120 frames per second, so intended to shoot slow motion. The way the Red camera was set up was to shoot a high frame rate, like say 120 frames per second, but then it conforms it for you at 24 frames per second, which means it basically plays it back at 24 frames per second already. So then it read those red files that were slow motion showed up as 24 frames per second. These ones show up at the same frame rate that you shot it in. That means it'll play back at 120 frames per second. It'll look very smooth and video-ish because it's playing 120 frames back, so therefore you don't have slow motion. So this camera, the Sony camera that this shot in, did not conform it down to 24 for you. So, and this is very helpful if you want to do things like speed ramping. It makes the file really easy to work with if you're trying to do have regular motion and then it goes gradually to slow and then back to regular motion or fast motion or something like that. It really helps with speed ramping. So I'm going to have to do a couple different settings here. And this is actually 1920 by 1080, which is 1/4 the resolution as the 3840 by 2160 footage. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to range by frame rate here, because I don't want to have them all the same frame rate when I do the proxies here. So I'm going to select all, so I have a range by frame rate, and I've got all my 23.976 ones right here. I'm going to hold down Shift and select all these in between here. I selected the first one, and so I'm going to select the first one, and then I'm going to hold down Shift and select this bottom one here. That's the last one, and we're going to send those over to Media Encoder. So Command M, send to Media Encoder. Go back to Media Encoder, and let's set these ones up here. So Command A, select all, or Control A, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to make these ones QuickTime, change all those to QuickTime, and now I can click on this one right here, hit OK, and change our settings here. Under Preset, we're going to go ProRes Proxy. I'm going to go under Video and change the resolution. We're going to take everything down to 1920 by 1080, and that'll actually match the resolution for the slow motion videos as well. And if you want to even take it down lower, the next one, the same aspect ratio going down lower than this, which is 16 by 9 or 1.78 to 1. And bring up our calculator. 3840 divided by 2160 gives you 1.78 to 1, a little less wide than the 1.89 to 1 here. This is also called 16 by 9 if you simplify it down to whole numbers. And then if you do 1920 divided by 1080, gives you 1.78 to 1. So I can cut this resolution in 1/4 the resolution. It's literally 1/4 the pixels, the pixel count. Uncheck this, and I can turn the link on here because I am matching the proportions here. We're staying in 16 by 9 or 1.78 to 1. Click on the top one, and we're going to go 1920, and the bottom one should change to 1080 proportionally. There you go. The audio channels here match. This is a stereo channel by default, and if you go to Premiere and look, and select one of these, it is a stereo as well, so I don't really have to do anything to the audio here. Hit OK. Now we choose a location, and this one did have day 1 and day 2 folders. They were shot on different cards, so I'm going to create a proxy folder in my production folder here, and this is from my day 1 card. So this one I do want to keep organized because I do have different cards. It'll help keep everything all organized rather than have one folder that just has a crap ton of footage in it. So hit choose, and then you can press play and it will start encoding. If I want to add a look to this footage here, because this is shot in S-Log footage here, so it's a very flat profile, I could do the same thing as I did before, put it in the timeline, perform a quick color grade, and then I can apply that look to my other files as well in the same fashion that we did with the red footage. And that way it will have that applied, and then it will export it out to the proxy footage. So I'm going to go back into Premiere. I've got those ones encoding, and I'm going to select all of my 120 frames per second here. And we're going to send those over as separate files. So here are those files that have been moved over to the Media Encoder, and these are a different frame rate. These are at 120 frames per second. So I'm going to select all those and do the same thing. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull this one down, go QuickTime, click on this name right here, hit OK, change this to ProRes Proxy, go to the Video tab, and 1920 by 1080, that's fine. The resolution, it was already at that resolution. If you wanted to knock this down proportionally, the next lower level would be 1280 by 720, which is half the amount of pixels as the 1920 by 1080, which is approximately half the pixel count as 1920 by 1080. Audio is going to be the same stereo. Let's double make sure, go to Premiere, and these do look like they have a stereo file to them. Sometimes when you shoot in slow motion, it excludes the audio. With the Sony cameras, it does not so. But we do want to match that. So I'm going to hit OK and choose the location. And this is still my day one Proxies folder. Hit choose and continue. I actually paused that here because I want to drop those in and do the settings. But now I can press play and continue the encoding. Okay, for the next step, I'm going to show you, once that's done encoding, I'm going to come back and I'm going to show you guys, we're going to do a little bit of an edit, and then we will show you how to relink the high quality media to your edit once you've finished editing. So, alright, all my footage is finished encoding, but I'm going to show you how to now edit a project with the proxies. The part that we really want to show you is how to relink the proxies once you've relinked the proxies back to the high quality media once you've finished the edit. So now as an editor, I can take just this folder with the proxies in it now, which is 6 gigabyte, very, very small, 6 gigabytes, which is very, very small, compared to the 240 gigabytes that I had at this 8K footage here. But I'm going to grab my proxies. I can take that with me on a different hard drive. It's a lot smaller, and take that home and edit it. So I'm just going to import those I'm just going to directly import that from here. So here's my media, and I'm going to hurry and do a quick little edit, just nothing fancy, just a quick edit just to show you what you do to relink it once your editing has finished. So there's my media. I'm going to grab one of these files, create a timeline, and this will be, keep in mind that this will, and I do have the little burn in at the bottom, so I know that that's the proxies. I didn't do that on the other media, but you can do that if you want to have a little watermark just to remind people that you are dealing with the proxies. So I've created that timeline there, rename that edit project or something. And now this footage is going to be very, very smooth. The 8K footage, like I said, was very choppy when I played it back, but now look at this. Look how smooth this plays back. And even when you like rewind and you skim, it's just really, really responsive and very, very slick. It's just, it has no problem keeping up with that. With this footage here, and it looks good, it looks decent, it's got a LUT applied and all that. So I'm gonna and one thing that you'll want to notice here is that my edit project here, my timeline is 2048 by 1080. So this is something we're gonna have to deal with later on when we relink the footage, because I want to access the full quality of the 8K footage when I'm editing here. So alright, so lower resolution, different aspect ratio, and also this is at 24 frames per second. Alright, so I'm going to perform an edit on this, then we're going to come back and I will show you how to relink it to the high quality media once we're done editing. Okay, so I've finished an edit now. This is a really basic edit, very simple edit. You can get as complex as you want to, but this is a very straightforward, simple edit here. And now I'm ready to relink it to my high quality media. So I've taken it back to my studio or the place where I have the footage, plugged that hard drive in. I've got the high quality media and the proxy on the same hard drive, but now we're going to relink these. In my opinion, this is one of the easiest ways, especially if you're doing a switch from low resolution to high resolution. I'm going to select my timeline here. I'm going to go up to File, and we're going to go Export, and we're going to export this out to what's called a Final Cut Pro XML. This is an old style EDL, and EDL being an edit decision list, but the old Final Cut Pro 7.1 before they went to Final Cut Pro 10. This was very commonly used in the industry, still is. Great way of round tripping this from like one software to another if you're taking this from Premiere Pro and putting it into DaVinci Resolve or something like that. But right now I'm just going to do it all within Premiere Pro. So we're going to export this to a Final Cut Pro XML and use that EDL to relink the footage here. So I'm going to go to my production folder here, and we'll just call Edit Project as fine. Save that. Does it really quick, and it's done. Now I'm going to do a new project here. So I can save this project if I want to, but I'm going to do a new project here. So let's close this one. Close project, because I've got that saved. We're going to do a new project, save it into my production folder, and call this high quality project. Alright, so now the next step is a little bit tricky because you want to make sure that the proxies are not found in the same folder as your project file. So this project file, that edit project XML, the Final Cut Pro XML I exported, you want to make sure it's not here, because if it's going to look through the folder where it exists and it's going to try to find the exact same footage, and it's pretty smart. It will first of all link it to the proxy footage before it will your high quality. So what you got to do is you got to move your proxy footage out of this folder. So I'm just going to grab this, and I can simply just move it out of the folder like this. I'm going to put it in this little test folder right there so I remember where it's at. So, okay, now it's not going to be able to find it because it's not in the same folder here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Premiere, and I'm going to import from my new project here. I'm going to import that EDL, or the XML. I'm going to do Command-I or Control-I. I'm going to select that Edit Project XML right there, import, and it's going to say, I can't find your footage. So I'm going to tell it where this first file is, and then it's going to relink everything automatically. So you want to relink others automatically. It'll search through the folders and relink everything with the same name. You want to match file property to the name. You don't want to match the file extension because it's going to look for MOV rather than the R3D that is the red extension. So turn out the file extension, and I'm going to tell it where this one single file is right there. And it only uses the files. It doesn't have all the media that was in here. It was only the media that I edited, so it didn't have all the other takes in here. It's just the media that I used in my timeline. So I'm going to tell it to find clip 5, and I'm going to hit locate. And my media is under this date folder there, footage, A06. And here's my red media folder. And I'm going to go down to clip 5 right there. Clip 5 is the one that it's trying to find. Clip 5 right there. And the red media has 2 clips in here, and it's because it was the way their cards shoot. They shoot up to 4 gigabytes and then start adding another file. So these are actually one clip, but it uses both of them and links them together when you're editing. So I'm going to match the one that has the same name there with the underscore 001. Select that and hit open, and everything else will relink automatically. And there's my timeline right there. If I double click on this and open it up, there it is. But there's one issue here is that everything is really zoomed up. Because this is still a 2048 by 1080 timeline, I can make this into whatever size of timeline I want. If I want to edit in 4K now rather than 8K and have like that zooming ability where I can basically have 200% zoom if I need to, I can make this into a 4K timeline. So that's pretty easy. If you want to make this 8K, you're going to select your file and look at the resolution, 8192 by 4096. I'm going to right click on this project file here and go to Sequence Settings, and we're going to change our resolution right here. I'm going to do 8192 by 4096. And say yes, hit OK. And now it redoes the timeline, and now I'm looking at the entire image here. So now my timeline that matches the resolution of these clips here. But like I said earlier on, I wanted a different aspect ratio, so let's say I'm going to be color grading this in 4096 by 2160, which is a different aspect ratio. So I'm going to right click on this, but let's say that's what I want my final export to be is 4K, so 4096 by 2160, hit OK, and now notice that it's zoomed up. So now all I have to do is go down to my timeline, select all my clips, right click, and say scale to frame size. So it just scaled, and now I have the letterbox here on the top and bottom. So I'm going to have to zoom that up a little bit. So if you want to get rid of the letterboxes here, I'm going to go under Editing and change our zoom on that. Unfortunately, Premiere, and I'm not sure why it does not yet have the ability to zoom up to scale to get rid of the letterboxes like it does in Media Encoder. It should be able to do that in Premiere, but it doesn't, unfortunately. So I'm going to scale this a little bit. Get that to right where those disappear right there. So at 106 exactly, I can copy this one, select everything else, select everything now, right click and say paste attributes, and it will paste that zoom onto everything. Now it's accessing the 8K footage, but it's in a 4K timeline with my proper aspect ratio. And now if you did need to zoom, you could technically zoom this like up to 200%, and that wouldn't have any quality loss. So now you have some reframing options. But you wouldn't be able to do that in an 8K timeline. If you did do the zoom in that would actually be decreasing the quality from 8K to whatever, how far you zoomed it to 4K so you'd have some 4K clips inside of an 8K timeline. But 8K is kind of insane, and not a lot of people export their projects to 8K. They'll usually do 4K or 1920 by 1080 or something like that. Well, that's it on this tutorial. That shows you the whole proxy process. This is the old school process, which means it's very beneficial if you are, this is probably better in like a studio setting when you're going to be round tripping the media from project to project, because this works really well if you're going to be just the editor. If you're not doing the effect work and you're not doing the color grading, but somebody else is going to be doing it, and you have to round trip it, and you've just been hired to do the editing, this is a really good process for that, because then you can proxy the footage, you can take it home, work on a laptop, and the footage works really, really well, but then later on it's going to be relinked to the high quality media, especially for something like using DaVinci Resolve to do the color grade. But if you're going to be doing everything inside of Premiere on your own, probably the best way to go is the Premiere Pro proprietary proxy creation method, which I show in another tutorial in this same playlist. So if you have any questions, let me know, and thank you for watching.